Rob, you are the final guest for this season of the series,
Ooh.
and I'm very happy to be in conversation with you today. How and where are you?
I am very well, thank you. Lovely to see you, Natalie. Yeah, I'm in Dartington, which is on the edge of Totnes in
Oh,
beautiful South Devon in the South Hams. Yeah.
just idyllic. I'm in Barcelona, and there are roadworks happening literally outside my flat right now, which hopefully you can't hear. But where
Well,
you are sounds glorious.
Barcelona's not too shabby either, is it really?
Oh, it's amazing. So I want to start with a question that I always open with. And I'm particularly intrigued to see how you respond to this on this occasion. But what do you feel or sense, if we can imagine that there's a global human psyche, is happening at this moment in time in this global human psyche? Yeah.
Gosh, some deeply complex kind of a breakdown. I think that's like there is the I mean, I'm no psychologist, but I feel like there is a coming to the surface a lot of deeply unsavory psychological traits,
Yeah.
which all the people around us hoped we had grown out of, hoped we had recognized, led us nowhere, hoped that, that we had outgrown, frankly,
Yeah.
and that this sort of, that thing that Obama and Martin Luther King used to talk about, the arc of justice bends inevitably, or whatever it is, you know what I mean?
Towards the good.
Towards the good. I think that it's more like, because we have failed to unpack and address and name the trauma that has built up over centuries and centuries, and we've just sort of gone along with our fingers in our ears, hoping that that will just disappear, and using other things to self-medicate instead. So that somehow we just hope that would all just sort of magically go away, and it's all rather coming back to bite us at the moment, I think. But I think as well, like alongside that, we are seeing a kind of there are also a lot of people who are really sort of returning to core values, and it's like, actually, no, we need to keep talking about this. We need to keep living as examples of this. We need to. So I always say, if this was a game of football, it's half time and we're losing 3-0.
Fuck.
It's like, particularly from a climate perspective, but that it's a strange, but then at the same time, you have all these surveys every year, last year that said that 89% of people in the world are passionate, understand climate change and that we need to do something about it. But when you ask them what percentage of people in the world they think also share those views, it's always less than half, So we live in this world which is sort of making us believe that the majority is the minority, and that minority voices somehow represent the majority. And I know from the work that I do, which we'll come on to talk about, that when I go out and I do my time travel activities with people, which I've done now with tens of thousands of people, actually then you tap into what is sort of common, our sort of common aims and cares and concerns. And that's kind of where it gets more interesting. But yeah, I think, we have to, we kind of get swept along with this thing that very strange minority views somehow now represent the mainstream, which I don't believe they do. And actually the views that are mainstream somehow are kind of crankish, weird, fringe things. And again, that's absolutely not the case. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's a bit of a reflection on that.
No, it does. And I think, there's many places I'd like to go with this, but maybe I'll jump ahead to a question that I had intended to ask. So this season in particular, we'll be looking at AI. And my main intention has been, how do we discern fact from fiction, reclaim agency, start to read through some of the narratives that are being propagated around the idea that the current track that we're on is exactly that. It's a track, it's immovable. we're going to go down this particular direction and nothing we can do, like basically the collapsing of possibilities.
Yeah.
And so when I saw that your book had come out and your publisher got in touch and there's the opportunity to have this conversation, I thought this is the perfect place to land the season, because I think so much of it is about, precisely to what you've just spoken about, is about reigniting in people a sense of real possibility, which does exist. It's like this idea that we've kind of, there's this phrase, what was it? It was a quote about not obeying in advance, that we kind of have given up, many folks have given up the notion that we have the capacity to make collectively imagined futures a reality because we think that it's pre-decided. And so this idea of the future being unwritten, and the book that you've written and the work that it draws upon and the exercise, I wonder if I might ask you to do the imaginal exercise that you often invite your guests to do, but with a slightly different twist. So in your podcast, From What If to What Next, which is drawing upon the book From What Is to What If, you invite people in this extraordinary way to imagine, sense, experience, live a day in the future where we've done everything in this moment where we are now to avert crisis, to support the flourishing of life, to protect what we love.
Yeah.
And so I want to ask you if you could do the same, but with a particular flavor, and then we'll come to the book, a particular flavor, which is, what if we made all of the decisions that we can now to harness technology and AI for the flourishing of life and for the healing of our planet and all of the beings that inhabit it?
I mean, so that's slightly tricky for me because I'm very much a sort of, I'm very much an AI skeptic.
Oh, great. Let's go with that, please. I would love to hear your thoughts.
I feel like we live in a time where the future is being colonized and the future is being cancelled, right? And every time we open any article in any magazine or online about the future, it always focuses on the tech.
Yeah.
It's always about tech. Oh, we'll have this, we'll have this, we'll have this, we'll have this. It's never about food or community or the social technologies that we will need. So for me, like, what's far more important than technologies is the social technologies. You know, I always say I feel like we have all these government departments and all these organizations and companies dedicated to innovation. It's innovation, innovation, innovation. One of the key points of the new book for me is that we already have way enough innovation. Everything that we need to do in order to change direction and stay below, 2 degrees now would be a miracle. We know how to do because it already exists, right? So when I think about the cities of the future and a low carbon, more livable, delicious, beautiful, communal future, this is not about sort of unicorns and flying elephants and like some crazy sort of, mad stuff. This is like, the super blocks of Barcelona, the cycling infrastructure of Rotterdam, the food system being built around the city of Liège, the car-free neighborhoods of Freiburg. Like William Gibson said, the future's already here. It's just not evenly distributed. Everything we need to know already exists. But the thing that's missing for me is not AI, is not some amazing app that's going to solve everything. It's the fact that actually people don't hear stories about the world that we could still create if we did everything we could have possibly done. And secondly, they don't wake up in the morning longing for that future. They don't wake up with that as their North Star. And for me, the technologies that we need are the social technologies, the storytelling technologies, the longing creation technologies that enable us to do that, because otherwise it's not going to happen. The tech should be following along in support of that, not leading from the front. So I for me, AI is one of those things where yet again Silicon Valley sort of positions itself uninvited with some piece of technology that nobody really wanted or ever said that they or asked for, which they then position at a time when when our survival depends upon us using much less energy and much less water, and they come up with with a new technology that's going to use massive amounts of energy. And Elon Musk is now building AI data centers that are run by gas turbines because they can't even be bothered to power them renewably. And then we build this tech with all the profoundly dangerous implications of it, and which I think a lot of it is going to turn out to have been a massive a bubble, a massive tech bubble nonsense. And then what they say is, well, we have to build this AI because that will mean all these billionaires are saying we have to build all this AI tech because that will show us how to solve climate change. It's like, we already know how to solve climate change. We need less billionaires. That's the point for me. We don't need billionaires going, hey, look, we've developed this new toy. And the thing as well is, sorry, you got me on a rant now.
I love this. Go.
The thing as well is that actually, I forgot what I was going to say now. I got all carried away.
Billionaires with their new toys.
It's just a ridiculous. Oh, I had a really good point. I was going to make that anyway. So yeah, it's like we just don't need it. I don't think. And when I go out and about and I do my time travel, my time machine exercise, which is what you were talking about, and where I bring my time machine and I say I'm going to take you to 2030, and you're going to love it, and we go there, and then it's like, well, walk around using all of your senses. And I've done that exercise now with tens of thousands of people in different settings, from 10 people in a room to 1,500 people in a hall in Belgium. No one ever mentions AI.
Right.
No one ever mentions the tech, right? Yeah. Actually, what people talk about is the air is cleaner, the bird song is louder, there's more of a sense of community, there's more of a sense that we're, together working on something, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And tech just seems to, that was what I was going to say as well, because the other thing is all those arguments that we use that are used for why we need to be putting all this money into AI. Oh, well, it's a race. You have to be at the front of the race. You don't want to be left behind in the race. And this is such an amazing opportunity for innovation and sort of new breakthroughs and new understandings. And, maybe this is the thing that, will bring people together. All those same arguments we can use about tackling the climate emergency.
Yeah.
It's a race. We have to be at the front of it. We don't want to be left behind. Oh, the innovation we could do, the new things with the new understandings we'll come to. But somehow, strangely, you've got Sam Altman running around in Silicon Valley at the moment trying to raise $1 trillion for the next iteration of AI from billionaires. You really think those billionaires are investing in that out of the kindness of their heart and because they want to tackle the climate emergency? Most of those people have long since given up on the idea that we can tackle the climate emergency. They all imagine a future in which they're living on sort of gated islands and jetting off to other planets. These people are insane, and they are developing this tech not for the well-being of the masses of humanity, although they somehow present it like that. Oh yes, this is going to cure cancer and tackle the climate emergency. We can do all that stuff without AI, and we just don't need it at all. So I try very hard to live a completely AI-free existence and to not use any of that rubbish at all. Because most of the stuff that I've seen that AI generates is just shit, really. It's like, I talk to young people, I write books, right? I love the thing about writing books where I sit down with a big stack of books and I go through them and I'll just find like a sentence in one book and I'll be like, that absolutely nails it. And you see, when you've read through my book, you'll see I'm like pulling quotes out of like Moomin books and different places. AI is not going to do that for me. I love that part of being creative and writing and doing the research and not just saying, hey, AI, find me a good quote about why imagination is so important.
Yeah.
I love the creative process. Why would we want to outsource that to Silicon Valley? I just don't get it at all.
Love it. Love your answer. This is brilliant. It's great because the thing is, I have a lot of doubts about AI, and I think the other thing that, and you mentioned this, like the colonizing of the future, and the inevitability of it all, and I think it's precise. Like it feels like a civilizational level, at some level, gaslighting, where I can see that there are specific areas in which it would be really useful to develop these tools as small systems that use way less energy, for instance, in health tech or climate tech, where it's justified. But there isn't any kind of context in which the rolling out of something which gobbles up fresh water supplies and increases the already overexploited reliance on gas and the rest of it. It just doesn't make any sense. And I was listening to my partners from Costa Rica, and one of the things we talk about quite a bit is also about kind of these systemic differences that happen to place. Yeah, systemic differences that happen based on where you're living. And there was a story that I read recently about a community in Chile who have finally got access to water supplies as opposed to having to rely on water trucks, which were less sort of, you wouldn't always get the water truck. It was a lot less reliable. And then one of these big tech companies comes in and says, well, having them just literally just create the infrastructure, say, okay, well, we're going to create a data center here. And the local community were like, no, you're not. We depend on this water for life. And it reminded me of the opening scene in The Matrix, where humans are literally plugged in and powering the machines. Life depends on water and resources to be able to flourish. And yet, in this particular instance, is this tiny snapshot of something much deeper, which is, what are our priorities? Why are we at this very important juncture in time not considering where we're going to place our bets? And I'm not placing my bets on giving all of these resources to the machine. It just seems insane.
I went to a thing recently in the Eden Project called Anthropy, which was like a gathering of 1,000 social innovators and philanthropists and sort of one of those sort of things, those And I went to this, and it was like, went to so many sessions where there was like all these people who were saying, well, AI is just a tool and it is what we make it. And I was thinking, how naive, like, when the internet came along, like, I'm old enough to remember life before the internet, right?
Me too.
And it was all right, wasn't it? Like,
that's great, fucking brilliant.
We weren't all sitting around going, oh God, I wish someone would invent the internet. It's like, actually it was all grand and everything worked really, really fine. And, and then the internet came along, and those of us who were more kind of idealistic and sort of radical were like, oh, well, maybe this is the tool. Audre Lorde had that.
Everything.
Yeah, that beautiful quote by Audre Lorde about, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house, right?
Yeah.
When the internet came along, we were all like, this is the tool that will allow us to dismantle the master's house. That went well, didn't it? Actually, the internet is now absolutely the master's tools in pretty much every way. And then along came social media, and we all went, oh, wow, these are the tools we can use to dismantle the master's house. And yet at the beginning, you had like the Arab Spring, you had the revolutions that were like the Twitter revolutions. All those people say you couldn't do that anymore. Social media is absolutely now the master's tools, literally. Mm-hmm. And then along comes AI, and everyone's like, it's like, don't get fooled again.
Yeah. But what is it? Why do we like? Because it does seem that these things there's a promise and a possibility, and then there's a capture, and a kind of like a crystallization, and then a domination and an extraction. What is it that seems to be it seems to be one of the emergent properties of complex human systems, that wherever there are enough of us that connect in whatever form, there arises this. I think that the desire for power is always there, but what is it that how can we do it differently? I think that's the question I ask. Are we kind of condemned to repeating this cycle, whatever the system or systems we create?
I think it's called capitalism, Natalie. I think it's
is that like the you're like, this is it, guys. Strap yourselves in.
It's like, money has to make more money.
Yeah.
And that creates these like just destructive cycles and patterns where it just has to make money from doing whatever it is. Why is it that Sam Altman can go galumphing about in Silicon Valley and raising $1 trillion, and at the same time when here in the UK we're told that there's no money for climate action, there's no money for insulating everyone's houses, there's no money for feeding children. Where there was a report this morning in the Guardian about there are now like Dickensian levels of poverty in the UK. 1 in 4 single mums go hungry because they can't afford to feed their kids. But we can raise $1 trillion for AI. It's because there is this sort of illusion that people are going to make huge amounts of money out of AI. It's like this sort of new frontier that you have to be at the front of. And money follows those kind of possibilities, and it doesn't follow the well-being of humanity. Like, it's a pattern that we see all around the world. So it's a kind of interestingly, there was a survey that came out a couple of weeks ago of young people, which said that almost half of young people said they would rather live without the internet.
I saw that Ipsos
You see
survey.
that?
Very
Wasn't that
interesting.
That was like way higher than we have this idea
Same.
that kids are all just like, oh, I love the internet, I love the internet, I love the internet, I love my phone.
Yeah.
Actually, about half of them are going, it makes us anxious, it makes us sick, it makes us isolated, it makes us lonely, it leaves us vulnerable to being radicalized or whatever. So one of the things that I talk about now is I wonder whether actually over the next 5 years what we're going to see. When I talk about, to come back to when you were saying, well, how do I see the future? I think one of the things is that we will see a movement led by young people about turning away from digital experience. And whether that,
I would love that.
whether that many young people, if that many young people can be translated into a movement of real experiences and real analog things with other people, and doing that very visibly and very publicly. So whenever I do my talks and I talk about, I've just come back from the future, it's amazing, let me tell you all about it. And I use, because I go around and I take photographs of things, and it's a really nice discipline for your listeners, actually, as you're walking around. Just keep looking out for things that look to you like the future you'd most like to see, and take pictures of it. And so when I do talks, it's like just things I've seen, like views down streets and I was in Geneva recently, and I went to an event where they filled this whole square with tables, and it was like a shared meal, and everybody came together, and everyone was there all afternoon and chatting and hanging out and eating food. And I took pictures of that, and I said, this was when I walked around in 2030 and I saw this, and this was the one of the manifestations of this movement of young people that was moving away from digital experiences and towards analog experiences, where they now use the word family as a verb, not just as a noun. And so they create these sort of familying events where you come together and meet other people, you eat together, you have conversations together. I don't feel, but the thing with all this Silicon Valley AI stuff is that it's always presented as if it's completely inevitable.
Yes, that's the thing.
And a while ago, I was watching, there was an advert that came up. Was it on the telly, or was it, where did I see it? For this thing called Gemini, which is this new Google chat thing. I don't even know what you'd call it. And it was these people sitting at a table in a cafe, and one of them was on his phone and saying, how do I use this Gemini thing? It's like, don't talk to the people around your table. What are you doing? Why would you want to do that? You've got some really lovely people on the table around you. Put your phone in your bag, for heaven's sake, you idiot. Why? Like this idea of AI therapy. You were talking about medics and how it can be useful for medicine. Yeah, absolutely. And there's stuff about how it can be better at detecting breast cancer in scans and stuff. But then the way that gets taken is, then let's get rid of loads of doctors. And let's not train so many doctors because AI can do it. Maybe actually we just need better doctors who are better trained and better resourced and not so exhausted, and actually a better funded health service, Because actually what you see in America then is how AI, like with all the Doge stuff, it's like, well, let's just get rid of all the government and just have it all run by AI. That's where they're going with this. If AI, if Amazon could employ nobody at all, they'd love it. Do that. If Spotify could just play music generated by AI, they'd love it.
Well, that's already become a thing. We're already seeing a counter trend of people coming off Spotify with their investment in military AI. Like it's quite, but there's something I want to pull on. So you're talking about longing. And I think there's something really interesting. It weaves all together with these younger people and some friends of mine who are in their 20s who are talking about, when they want to go and meet people to date, they'll go to running clubs or they go to offline events. Or actually, there's a club here in Barcelona called the Offline Club. So there's all of these pockets that are already happening. And the curious thing for people like you and I who remember what it was like before the internet, we have a recollection, so we can carve out the time possibly with greater ease because there's a recognition of what it feels and is like. But for these younger folks, there's a sense of like, it's not a rediscovery, it's a discovery. And so that threshold of experience of maybe going on, I don't know, a hiking weekend for a week where you don't have access to your phone, these are almost potentially initiatory experiences back into contact with the living world in a way that they are not so much for us. Huh?
It's like going to the moon.
Yeah, except much lusher and right here under our feet. You know what I mean? But so I'm curious, like, and let's talk about your book. So I want to ask you about creating this sense of longing, which is something that I think you do so beautifully in all of the work that I've sort of, encountered that you create. And also just the cover is so beautiful. It makes me long to pick it up and touch it. So How to Fall in Love with the Future, a time traveler's guide to changing the world. And it's beautifully written. And I love that on the front cover, there's an image of someone walking down this beautiful iron wrought.
Up. They're walking up.
Are they walking up? Oh, they are walking up the spiral staircase amidst this beautiful foliage and these plants that look lush and gorgeous. Like, talk to me about longing and about your writing of this book, Rob.
So, longing is such a powerful, beautiful emotion. It's not necessarily a comfortable emotion. It's like our first love when they go away to college or whatever. It's like a soul deep thing. And when I go and I do talks I do a lot of talks in like France and places. A lot of European languages don't really have a word for longing. They use the word desire and then put loads of superlatives at the front. Really, 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 really strong desire. German, they have a word Sehnsucht, which is very similar to the English word longing. But longing for me, it's like you can't sleep.
Yeah,
It's that. And so Don DeLillo, the novelist, once said, "Longing on a large scale is what makes history."
Wow, that's
and I think we forget that. And so the point of the book is to say, what would our activism look like if its primary objective, its primary goal, was the cultivation of longing? So it's not just about talking about collapse and extinction. It's not just talking about everything that's going wrong in the world. It's not just focusing on everything that's broken. It's talking about the future in such a way that it cultivates and nurtures longing. And that comes with, I think, with it a recognition that actually climate scientists are terrible at cultivating longing. That's not their job. They're the doctors there to give us the diagnosis. Climate activists aren't that great at cultivating longing because we get stuck in that sort of adversarial kind of mode and just talking about facts and figures and stuff like that. The people in our culture who are brilliant at cultivating longing are musicians and writers and poets and street artists and people who work in advertising and people who write series for Netflix and people like the creative people. We can't do this without the creative people. The way I talk about it in the book is it's like when we went to the moon, right? So in 1865, Jules Verne wrote a book called From the Earth to the Moon, which was this kind of thrilling story about where he pulled together all the best science and engineering he could find and wrote this thrilling story, some of which actually turned out to be incredibly accurate to what actually happened 100 years later. The rocket was built of aluminium and did have 3 astronauts in it. It did take off from Florida. Lots of people did come to see it. Some of it not quite so accurate, like in his book, it was fired out of a cannon. And we know that if you actually did that now, the moment you press the button, the astronauts would basically be turned to jam the moment you press the button. But basically that book then inspired other engineers and scientists, but just as importantly, it also inspired storytellers who started telling stories about what that would be like to actually go to the moon. And then you had this backwards and forwards for like nearly 100 years of like Mickey Mouse went to the moon, Popeye went to the moon, Tintin, of course, very famously went to the moon. You had jazz dances about walking on the moon. You had it like it got into our, culture. We rehearsed it and rehearsed it and rehearsed it. And then it meant that actually when Neil Armstrong did finally land on the moon, Hergé, who did the Tintin books, did this cartoon that was in the New York Times of Neil Armstrong landing on the moon and being greeted by Tintin and Captain Haddock and Professor Calculus and Snowy the dog saying, "Welcome to the moon, Mr. Armstrong," because his footsteps on the moon were preceded by by thousands and thousands of stories. So the longing comes first. We don't have 100 years when it comes to climate change, but the same principle applies, that we need to be focusing on the extraordinary things that we could still create. It's one of the reasons why, you might have noticed in the very front of the book, one of the dedications in the book is to the free and flourishing, to the flourishing free Palestine of the near future.
Yeah, yeah.
Because if we don't talk about it, it disappears. But if we can talk about it, and we can talk about it in a way that cultivates longing and emotion towards it, that's kind of how we do it. There's the question of longing. The other question that runs through the book is about, what does our activism look like if we behaved as though time travel was possible? Yeah. Which we can come on to afterwards. But, those are the two sort of questions that kind of run through it for me. And longing is so important, because that's who we are. That's what gets us out of bed in the morning, right? That's the kind of, and so it makes me really curious. What would our activism look like if it was driven by the cultivation of longing? And so there's lots of stories that I tell in the book about then what that might look like.
So I have a couple of questions around that, and I'm thinking about, so when you said about what we're waking up for, like I'm an artist and a musician alongside doing the stuff that I do, which is speaking stuff and the writing stuff. But I also recognize that one of my biggest nemeses is bureaucracy, admin, emails, like these things that are insignificant when you get one or two of them, but they become this mountain, this beast that devours so much time. And that then the things that kind of allow me to live in that space of longing, of creation, of enchantment, which can then call things into being, gets eaten away sometimes. And it's kind of quite a weird process to think of these banal elements of administration being something which could so powerfully overwhelm the things that actually give my life greatest vitality. And so one of my questions to you is, for folks who have these very strong, or perhaps even medium level strong, or even awakening nascent seeds of yearning to create, and who feel called and moved by your words, that there's some resonance there, are there any particular ways in which we can connect to that, pick up that golden thread, and actually follow the calling to create more, to cultivate these senses of yearning? Like, how do we fight or like create differences so that we don't have to get swamped alive by the admin and the pressures to make a living? Because it's complicated, right?
Of course it is. Yeah. I think so. One of the key insights for me from the last book that I did, which was called From What Is to What If, which was about imagination, was that imagination needs space, which kind of maybe sounds obvious, but it was a bit of a sort of a light bulb for me, that actually, whether we're talking about as individuals or whatever, the story that I always loved doing with audiences, and which comes out of the book, was I asked people to imagine that you're in Arles in the south of France in 1888, in the Yellow House on Place Lamartine. And Vincent van Gogh comes into the kitchen with this beautiful bunch of sunflowers someone's just given him, and he arranges them in a little earthenware pot on the table in the little kitchen there as the sunlight comes through the window, and he thinks, oh, beautiful, like that, very nice, yes. Oh, I think I'm just going to check my Instagram.
No.
And I'm going to check my Facebook. Oh, and I'm just going to check my Twitter. And then 2 hours later, he's watching videos of skateboarders falling downstairs. And he can't remember why he even started watching videos of skateboarders falling downstairs. He never would have painted any of those sunflowers paintings. Yeah. And you think of the profound impact those pictures have had on so many people, myself included, that actually the imagination needs space, and we need to protect that space, because otherwise it just gets eaten up by stuff, and when I do my time travel activity with people, and I get them to close their eyes and we time travel, and they come back, and then I ask them to tell me, well, what did you see? What did you feel? What did you hear? And often there's tears, so it's often a very powerful experience for people to connect to the fact that there might even be a future that's not absolutely shit, and, and then I say to them, doing this should be a daily practice. like like running, meditation, yoga, any of those things. You make time for those things, but because the reality is that doing the opposite of this exercise is a daily practice. Every morning we wake up, we open our phones say, everyone's horrible, everything's crap, everything's going to hell in a handcart. Go back to bed, probably best idea, So actually intentionally making space for your imagination, whether that's saying, actually, do you know what? I'm not going to watch Netflix tonight. I'm going to read a book. I'm going to read a novel with a really exciting story. Do you know what? I'm actually going to look again at the feed that I've set up for myself on social media so that I bring in some stories of good things that are happening in the world rather than just all the terrible things. I'm going to subscribe to positive news. I'm going to subscribe to Imagine 5, which is an amazing magazine that comes out of Amsterdam. I'm going to find those stories. I'm going to look at what's happening in the transition movement. I'm going to look at films like the French film Tomorrow that are full of solutions and stories. I'm going to read some like hope punk, solar punk sort of Afrofuturist writing about what the future could be like. Like we have to kind of feed that because because otherwise the world is just sending us stuff that goes too late. You can't do anything. You're only one person. Why would you even think of why would you do anything? Actually one of the things that I write about in the new book, which was a really interesting insight for me, which is that if you are imagining the future or remembering the past, it's almost exactly the same neurological neural networks that kick in, right? Because what you're doing is you're basically, if you're trying to imagine the future, you're going to the cupboards of your memory and you're looking through them, like I might look through my record collection here, and you're going, what happens if I put this together with this? Right. So if you just watch Fox News all day or GB News or whatever the Barcelona equivalent of that is, and then you're trying to imagine a low carbon future, it's really hard because you've got nothing to work with. You're going to your cupboards and your cupboards are empty. So one of the most important things you can do, firstly, is to fill those cupboards with stories of things that are happening around the world. There's a whole chapter in the book called Adjust Your Disbelief Suspenders, which is basically just stories of things I've seen all around the world that I know work. Of course they work. I've been there. I've seen them. I say we need to get rid of stop using the word impossible and replace it by saying not yet, because of course these things work because you can see them wherever you are. So it's that thing of, we need to, and then also we need to make it as multisensory as possible, because then what should happen is if we can give people, what I try and do on my workshops and trainings that I run, is if we can give people an experience where they've traveled to the future, but they've done it with other people. So it's, and they've attached emotions to it, and they've attached smells to it and sounds to it and touch and feeling to it. And they've laughed and they've cried and it's been like a real kind of emotional experience. Then what happens is that next time they go to their memory to try and imagine a low carbon future, they have this sort of glittery thing there that they can connect to. Which is why I say one of the things that I try and do with the workshops I do is to give people an experience where at the end people can say, when I was in the future.
That's
when
so
I
powerful.
was in the future. So powerful. Absolutely.
And it's curious, sorry, go on. You're going to add something there. I was just thinking about these when you're talking about the future being unevenly distributed, and these experiences of what it's like to be in a place where you can qualitatively feel the difference. I was recently at Plum Village for an artist's retreat, and it's a Zen Buddhist monastery in the south of France.
Very jealous.
Never been before. Have you been?
No, I've never been. I've been invited a couple of times, and I'd love to go to Plum Village.
Oh,
I've read about it.
I can't recommend it enough. But what was cute, because I went in very ignorant of the practice and the place, but I thought I'll go along because I know quite a lot of extraordinary people who've been and who found it really moving to be there. So I went, and one of the things that I realized very, very quickly, to think into sort of your multisensory description, was how constricted and tightly I was holding on. Like my body just felt so tight when I arrived. And just by virtue of the fact of being in this place for a week, I went completely offline. Like I had my phone on airplane mode, just using it as a clock. And I was entirely unreachable. And I've not done this in years. I used to do a digital detox every year, maybe 1 to 2 weeks, just to come back to myself and come back to this moment. And what I realized was that for me at least, I'm walking around in normally it's such a sense of bracing and tension, and like the kind of, if the body can't rest, then we can't allow things in. And there was something so powerful about being at a place of refuge where you are in community, you are familying, you are singing, even if you're out of tune, it doesn't matter. You're noticing the crazed frogs with their weird voices that sound like they're drowning at 4 o'clock in the morning. Like, it's just, and there is such a beauty in just being, and that in everyday life, that feels like it was existing in a bubble, but it's not. People are there holding the space, practicing, creating this relational field of experience that other people can then step into and sense what it's like to be living a different way. And it's real and it exists. And so when I was reading your book, and also with the previous book, just the sense that you can go and visit these places and touch and feel and sense and smell and be in relationship to people who are creating this. Because I think so much of the time, so much of our experience of life at this moment in time is quote unquote lived, or at least perceived through screens. It's a very collapsed, impoverished experience of the world. It's a window into an abstraction, which is polished and not particularly representative of life. And we forget also, this is a bit of a sidetrack, but things like pornography, because it's such a kind of it becomes, I suppose, using hyper objects to get people off. But then the real experience of being two animals in being with each other, discovering each other in all the messy, glorious, awkward fabulousness, it's like the imagination, like to flex those muscles so that we're able to live in a space which is much richer, and how much we learn, how much we long for that, and we learn to kind of inhibit it. I don't know. There's something about that desire for the chaotic, creative messiness of being in our bodies as well, which I think we've become estranged from in a large part. At least that's my sense of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a different thing to be, oh, what a beautiful cloud. With the sun's going down, that cloud's such a beautiful pink. Oh, isn't that beautiful? Than thinking, oh, I must take a picture of that and put it on Instagram, and then actually I'm going to judge how valid an experience that was by how many likes I get from people. It's like, just look at the fucking cloud, enjoy the cloud, the beautiful cloud. Yeah, it's yeah. The thing, so when I was 18, I went to live in a Tibetan Buddhist monastery for 3 years.
Oh wow! No way.
Yeah,
I didn't know this.
In Italy, when you could still do that, when you could go and live in Italy for 3 years. Do you remember? God, amazing. And,
I know, right?
And it was such a profound sort of life experience, and learning to meditate from great teachers. Not that I'm very good at it, and I it's very much lapsed, sadly. But it's still like that is something that I still really kind of hold on to as like, yeah, of course, we need to, it's in From What Is to What If, I talked about the difference between, we live in a culture where we use these words creativity and innovation and imagination completely interchangeably, and they're very different things, I think. Creativity and particularly innovation are taking people's ideas and using them to make a product that capitalism can sell. It's the production of something that's marketable. Imagination is not. Imagination is mischievous and bold and a bit naughty sometimes and unpredictable. And it's Ursula Le Guin has this lovely quote where she says something like, the word creativity has been so devalued by capitalism that I can't bring myself to use it anymore, but they can't have imagination. It's like that's kind of why I wrote From What Is to What If, was that actually it felt to me like I feel immensely grateful that I had a childhood in which my imagination was recognized and nurtured and supported. I read voraciously. I drew. I listened to music. I was like always out walking around, looking at things and drawing things and digging holes and endlessly curious about the world. And that was supported, and I feel like that just slightly out of our field of vision, this thing that is so fundamentally important to us as human beings, and the thing that actually, according to Sapiens, the book Sapiens, he says in there, the imagination is the thing that distinguishes us from all other, or from all the other life on the planet. Our ability to go, yeah, I wonder what's on the other side of that hill. Maybe it's a dragon. Maybe it's another city. Like that is like, that's uniquely what makes us human, right? And but it feels like we're not giving it attention or respect, and we've created, in a sense, this sort of perfect storm of factors that are profoundly damaging to the imagination. And so, just slightly out of where we're looking, our collective imagination is sort of dwindling and desiccating and sort of curling up. And what I want to do in that book was to put it back in the middle of the conversation and go, this is really important. If we lose our imagination, we are absolutely screwed. And we are so much easier to control if we have no imagination. And all the great revolutions in history started by focusing on the imagination. You know, imagine if Martin Luther King had stood up and said, I have a nightmare. Everyone would have been...
Or I have a spreadsheet.
I have a spreadsheet. Or even worse, bloody, what's he called?
I have a chatbot.
I have AI. Bye. Wes Streeting in the run-up to the last election said, the only thing worse than no hope is false hope. It's like, what are you talking about? How about some hope, Wes? Can we have a bit of hope? That might be nice, mightn't it? It's like, actually, the thing with the imagination is kind of the result of us being in good balance and in good health. I feel like it's like it's when we are, because we know if you are experiencing trauma or stress or anxiety, if your system is awash with cortisol for whatever reason, then your hippocampus, the part of your brain your imagination comes from, shrinks by up to 20%. And what the research shows is that what then happens is that the future disappears and you just get stuck in the present and you get stuck in the past. And it feels to me like we have created the perfect cortisol economy right now. And so many people are in this sense of sort of precariousness, and we have created the best conditions for the hippocampus to shrink. And so the point of that, from what is to what if, was to say, what does it look like if we create the best conditions to expand the hippocampus again? Because our survival depends on it, right? We have to be able to reimagine everything. So so for me, like the imagination is a thrilling thing. And we all have, like, what you were talking about, those experiences, those times in your life when your imagination has been on fire, when you've read some amazing book and you've been like, yeah, God, and it could be, or for me, it's when I draw, like I go and I do drawing, I do printmaking, I go out into the world, I sit and I draw and I see the world in a way that normally I don't. It's a kind of a form of meditation for me. I can look at drawings I did 30 years ago and I can remember what it smelt like and sounded like when I did that drawing, because I get into that space and into that zone. Yeah. And it's when we are at our most alive, I think.
I'm curious to ask, is there anything, so you're doing a lot of interviews about this, because I think one of the things is getting it into people's hands or into people's realm of possibility that there are other ways of being, and to give people a glimpse, as you do so beautifully with the book, of the possibility of things being different and how we can participate in that. And I'm kind of curious, with all the interviews that you do, is there a particular question that you don't get asked enough, or something that you're burning to share that hasn't yet come up in conversation, or perhaps that arises right now?
Ooh. I mean, I guess one would be that, so in parallel to writing this book, I've also been doing this other project, which is called Field Recordings from the Future, which has just been such a lovely, lovely thing to do. And we actually made an actual record called Field Recordings from the Future, which is just a beautiful, beautiful thing. And so the idea was that during the first lockdown, like lots of people, maybe like yourself even, I started a podcast.
Yeah.
But also during that time, I discovered like ambient electronic music. I started listening to a lot of ambient electronic music, which is this beautiful, incredibly diverse genre of because I find like if I'm trying to work or write or think, right, if there's a beat or if there's lyrics, I can't concentrate. That
Yeah.
takes all of my attention. But ambient music, I can listen to it and I can work, and it's really, really gorgeous. And I started listening to some people who were using field recordings in really, really intriguing ways. Particularly, there's a guy in Norway called Biosphere, makes beautiful, beautiful music using field recordings. And then I had this thought where, because it was in parallel to writing this book, where I thought, what if those field recordings actually came from the future? Like if you could beam back recordings from the future and make really gorgeous music that included them, maybe that might be a thing that could cultivate longing, right?
Oh, I love it.
So there was a particular piece of music I was listening to over and over that I just loved by an artist called Mr. Kit. And it had this beautiful, at the end, it sounded like a whole community of people standing on a beach watching a firework display. And it just felt like community and celebration. And I thought, you know, if I did this project, I'd love to do it with that Mr. Kit guy. But he's probably like impossibly cool and lives in Berlin or Barcelona or, you know, where all the cool people live, you know, and it doesn't answer emails. And I looked him up and he lived in my town.
No way.
Yeah. And I thought, and it turns out he knew some of my kids.
Oh, that's
because
so funny.
And so I went and had a coffee with him and said, I've got this idea. And then I would go off and visit places that already sounded like the future needed to sound like. So I went to Utrecht and recorded the Bicycle Rush Hour. I went to the Vauban in Freiburg, the biggest car-free neighborhood in Europe. 3,000 people live in this neighborhood with no cars.
Wow.
I went to beaver rewilding projects, to regenerative farms, to underground mushroom farms, and made recordings there. And then I would send them to Kit and say, look, describe the place and what it was like and how I imagined a piece of music might be and everything. And then so we've created these 8 pieces of music, which I think are beautiful. And we've then made videos that go with each of them. And then we've created this live immersive thing called the Field Recordings from the Future Time Portal, which we've performed a couple of times, where people come into a space and then we tell a story about this journey that we've been on into the future, and we share the videos and talk about what we saw and perform the music live, and it's just beautiful. So next year we're going to be doing a sort of a tour in the UK and also in some places in Europe as well. So
when are you doing it?
We're going to be doing it in Copenhagen at the end of September, and then so far all the other dates are going to be next year. Okay. But it's a beautiful thing, and it's like you pick people up in 2025 and you take them to 2030, 2035 in a way that's really multi-sensory. There's a woman I write about in the new book called Wasima Labic, who lives in Berlin, who does this work she calls Muslim futures. And she coined this term sensual futuring, which I just love. And so it's kind of an attempt at that. But also just the other thing I'd mentioned that has been developed in parallel with those two things as well is that we recently launched our Predict Your Future machine. I worked with this amazing young engineer called Tony Elkington who built this machine for us, which is like, remember when you were a kid and you go to the seaside and they'd have those Predict Your Future machine and you press the button and it prints you out.
What was the name of that thing? It was especially like Zoltan. It was in like with big. That's it.
Yeah, Zoltan. So it's like a sort of transition version of Zoltan, and it's like this beautiful thing, and you press the button and it prints you out a future that'll be something like, you know, but the future is beamed back to you from your 2030 self.
Amazing.
So it'll be, you know, you've just had your first. Excuse me. You've just had your first harvest of fruit from the fruit trees you planted after you depaved half of your street back in 2025 or whatever it is, you know. And we just did an event in London where it had its first outing. And it was so magical to watch people in the line to press the button. like the
Oh, how fun.
anticipation people had. And also it had this really kind of unexpected thing, which I think you get with like horoscopes in newspapers, where they'll
Yeah.
say, you will see a blue thing today that will make you smile. It was the same where people were like, they would get they would get their fortune. They'd say, oh, that's the thing I was thinking of doing. We've already started working on that. There's a beautiful serendipity that starts to happen. So I'm working with him. We're thinking about how could we design a whole sort of arcade of fun
Oh,
things that
wow.
connect you to the future. So this is sort of my hope with the new book, right? Is that what the
Yeah.
book will do is that it will inspire a kind of a positive futurism movement that draws from existing futurism movements like Afrofuturism, like
Yeah.
sort of indigenous futurism movements, and sort of bring that alive using all the different creative tools that we have, and things that as activists we just often don't imagine.
So I'm curious, and this is sort of in spring. I'm going to be doing it's like a painting, ceremonial, musical, immersive, nature connected animist exhibition type thing in London, which I'm
Wow.
currently working on the paintings. And I'm going literally to Bristol this Friday to record the song. It's called Deep Forests. Anyway, and one of the things I'd like to do is invite people in these different communities to come and offer experiences that are aligned with that kind of, I guess, the flourishing of life, with that sort of vision. And I don't know if the dates will align, but I would absolutely love it if you want to come and do any of those things in the space, in community. So just like planting that seed in your psyche. I don't know if you're
Planted.
up for collaborations, but that could be really fun.
That could be fun, yeah.
So we're coming to time, and one of the questions I tend to ask at the end of these conversations, and I'm really curious what you'll answer to this, because I feel like we've already touched on many of the threads, but is how do you orient yourself towards life and vitality and beauty and longing and imagination when things are really difficult, when you encounter moments of too much grief or too much overwhelm?
Uh, I think there have been a few big kind of influences on my life that fuel what I do. So one of them for me is punk. Was a huge influence on me when I was like 12, 13, 14. That whole kind of do it yourself culture. If you don't like things, then do something else. Very famously there was a I think it was Scritti Politti made this single that basically had this sleeve that
Great name.
folded out, and it told you everything that you needed to know in order to make your own single. Where they where they recorded, how
Wow.
much it cost, where they got it mastered, where they got the sleeves printed, how much they cost, where they got the labels printed, how much it cost. Like, do it yourself, get on with it, make it, do it yourself. I was that generation where school was so rubbish
Yeah.
and so out of touch with everything that that we had to sort of educate ourselves. So records you listen to at the time, you get to the end of listening to that record with a list of 5 books you needed to read.
Wow.
By the time you listen to Unknown Pleasures by Joy Division, there were certain things you then had to go off and read, and you had to find out about. Or bands like Crass, who were like more a sort of political, philosophical movement than a band. And I became vegetarian when I was 13 because of a
Wow.
record that Crass put out, and I've been vegetarian ever since. So
Wow.
so that stuff is very sort of formative. I think also there's a book that I read when I was 18 that was called Shambhala: The Way of the Warrior by Chogyam Trungpa, which is about the idea of living your life as a kind of warrior, as what he calls a Shambhala warrior, which is like a sort of a warrior of compassion and kindness. And that had a huge kind of impact on me. And then spending time living in the monastery I told you about, with that sort of thing of, we have this idea in the West that compassion just means sort of holding the door open for people, whereas actually in Tibetan culture, they talk about compassion as being like a flash of lightning in the sky, or like a diamond, or, it's like and when you meet someone like the Dalai Lama, you get this sort of sense of kind of compassion as something that fills the room, it's
Yes.
like this.
Yes.
So, and then and living a life that's kind of service to all the sentient beings, and finding the most skillful way to do that in a time that demands that from us. And I feel like, I'm a father, I have 4 sons.
Oh.
And I feel like despair is a luxury that I don't have.
Huh.
Pessimism is a dead end that takes us nowhere. And my pessimism and resignation is a gift that I refuse to give to the people who are intentionally trashing everything. They don't get to have that. Sorry. That's not what I'm about. So, of course, I always say to people, like, if you're not regularly terrified about climate change, you're not paying attention. And we have left this so late that, if you were strictly putting money on it, the odds don't look great at this point. But at the same time, we know from human history that, that human beings are capable of doing extraordinary things in very short periods of time when they decide that that's what they want to do. There are endless stories of amazing shifts that happened in 10 years. And I think human beings are great. That I know that within the environmental movement, sometimes there's this sort of misanthropic, the world would be better off if we all just weren't here anymore. I don't believe that. I think human beings are amazing and are capable of extraordinary things. And I love people, and I love art and music and life and food and beautiful things. and I feel like that's worth fighting for. And so that's kind of what gets me out of bed in the morning. And of course, there are moments when it's horrific and it's overwhelming, and you just think, well, what's the point? But then also, we have to bear in mind, where we focus our energy is really, really important. Sorry, I've got a bit of a cough, but there's a guy called Henry Giroux who's a political philosopher guy in the US, and he coined this term, the Trump disimagination machine. He said there is this powerful, the way that people like him work is to just take up all of our mental space. So we wake up, a couple of months ago, it was like all anyone could talk about was Trump and Musk.
Yeah.
They're just 2 people.
Yeah.
They're 2 people, right? One of them's very rich, one of them's very powerful. We're recording this. You're in Barcelona. I'm in the UK. Why are we focusing on them continually all the time and giving all of our hope for the future, all of our belief that change is possible, to 2 insane psychopaths quite a long way away? Of course, they're dangerous and they're causing a lot of damage. There's also a huge number of people who are trying to do things. And where you live, wherever that is that you're listening to this, there's things you can do. There's ways you can intervene. You can bring your skills, your passion, your brilliance, your energy to doing something. Get involved in local politics. Start a project. The book is full of stories of projects that's basically started with 5 people sitting around a table going, so should we do it then? Yeah, all right then. And there is such power in that moment. You have no idea. Maybe that project will collapse in 6 months. Maybe it won't go anywhere. But maybe in 20 years' time, they'll put a blue plaque up outside that building to the moment you had that meeting and to what it created. So don't be a bystander. I always say to people, that future that I write about, and it came about because you decided not to be a bystander. It didn't come about by accident. And I'll just finish with just a beautiful little thing that you remember recently, a couple of weeks ago, before we recorded this, there was a thing, maybe you even had it where you were, where there was the power cuts in Spain and Portugal, and all the power went out, right?
Yeah.
And
it was great.
We have all of this sort of dystopian language. People say, it was like Dickensian. It was like the Matrix or whatever it is. There was a lovely thing where I saw someone on LinkedIn. They said, well, for the first hour, nobody knew what was going on. And then after a couple of hours, everyone just went out into the street and people brought out food and musical instruments. And they said, it was like being in a Rob Hopkins book. That's
That's
good.
such gorgeous praise.
We have a name for it. Finally, good. Okay, so let's try and build a world that's like being in a Rob Hopkins book. Wouldn't that be nice?
It'd be so nice. I mean, it actually was. It's like people with radio stations, and people were giving free shots down the street, and then there was music making in the squares, and it was like, it was great. Ah, well, thinking about being in a Rob Hopkins book, yeah, definitely go out and read this book, How to Fall in Love with the Future. And Rob, if people want to find out more about your extraordinary other projects, so the field recordings from the future, your other books, the podcast, where's the best place for people listening to find you?
My website is robhopkins.net, and there is a thing, I do a monthly newsletter called the Time Traveller's Gazette.
Ooh.
And it has all the different things that I'm up to and news and interesting stuff. And if you go to robhopkins.net at the top, there's a box that says email newsletter. Pop your email address in there. You'll get it free of charge every month. And because I feel like I'm trying to build a kind of community of practice, a community of interest around this sort of time travel, positive futurism work. So sign up there, get involved. And there's also a website, which is fieldrecordingsfromthefuture.co.uk. Or you can also find that project on Bandcamp, and you can buy the beautiful double vinyl edition, which every home should have, really. I don't know why anyone wouldn't. And yeah, and also the newsletter will tell you where I'm doing things and where I'm speaking and where I'm running workshops and all that kind of stuff. And
I'm signing up.
Yeah, well, do please. And it might be full, but in November, at a place called Hawkwood House, which is an amazing centre for future studies near Stroud in the UK. I'm running a 2-day course on how to fall in love with the future, which we ran in May and which people loved, and it's a beautiful place. I think there might be 1 or 2 places left. Otherwise, we'll run it again next May probably. So come along on that as well. And add these skills to your toolbox of
Rob, thank you so much. It's always just a scintillating ride and pleasure talking with you. And thank you for all this beautiful work that you're doing in the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for sharing it. Thank you.